we go?
Yes, we can go.
Good morning. It's now 9 o'clock, and I'll call the Sewage and Water Board Finance and Administration meeting to order. Special counsel, please call the roll.
Director Howard?
Here.
Director Pacho?
Here.
Director Barnes? Director Kennedy? Chair, we do not have a quorum, but we may proceed with presentation
All
items.
right, thank you. Then we will proceed with the two presentation items. Gray Lewis, our Chief Financial Officer, will provide the board's financial summary update. Gray?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to provide an update. Some good things coming into play last week last week of June, we finished the audit. So many thanks to the team, and Latricia Matthews, our finance director, led that effort again this year. And on the budget side, I wanted to mention two different things related to the GFOA, Government Financing Officers Association. Just to remind the board, we talked about this a while back, but we have an annual award process for both the Budget Excellence Award, which the budget team received for last fiscal 24, and then the financial audited annual comprehensive financial report follows GFOA standards. And that's good, really good, because it provides more information than is required under accounting standards. So that's more transparency to the public, more data that anyone can see online. So we submitted our financials, got to receive those two GFOA awards. So very thankful to the budget team, Dexter Joseph, Kevin Garrison, and as well Latricia and the whole team that worked on those. So just want to share that with the committee. And then jumping into May, I think we've seen some better trends in terms of Q2 shaping up much better than our Q1. So I'm going to run through some highlights. So May operating revenues, $21.2 million. As we look into the preliminary June, is about $22.2 million. So trending better than Q1, and that puts us about 8% below budget. So we need to continue to monitor it. But with the smart meter really a substantial completion over 123,000, we're seeing some of the benefits, all the benefits you would expect that we've been talking about. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Then drainage taxes were $3.1 million for the month, $50.7 million year to date, about $1 million ahead of budget. The operating expenses for the month, 29.1, below our conservative set budget. And as we kind of look into this, we have some slower spending, probably timing related. We do have encumbrances on the budget, so we do expect some additional invoices. But the main categories are kind of broken down into the field, like pumping and power, treatment, transmission, distribution, about $7 million of favorable variance. So just looking at talk to the sewer on the sewer side, treatment is about $5 million less, but with Veolia, the contract really pretty similar. So not, something we're not at this point saying, that's a savings or that's kind of permanently there, but we'll continue to monitor. So timing related expenses have been less. And then on the back office, the rest of the variance is mostly in admin and general. So there's less spending through the month of May. About $16 million of the total operating expense favorable variance. And then non-cash expenses were lower as well. So
A question on drainage taxes. Has the city collected the taxes by, they were all due, weren't they?
yeah, so end of February, so March, April, May, about first 3 months have been collected and forwarded over. We'll continue to get some, but that's the majority.
So we're short almost 25 million at this point?
Yeah, we do see some of the late payments come through, but in terms of like when we get the majority, the roughly 70 some odd million, 74 is what we budgeted. It might take up to 6 months. I have to look.
Because I assume that we're not having 1/3 deficit on city tax collections, which means something's just not coming over, if that's the case.
Right. Well, it's been 3 months, so if, you know, I guess the 30-day, 60-day, I'll take a look at the committees, come back and see how much is collected in, say, the first 180 days versus the first 90 days, which is what we had so far. So for the month, all the expenses that talked about are, and we back out adjusted, so our revenue less adjusted expenses about 6.6 million for the month of May and 56.7 million year-to-date. So like this, skip over to the next slide. I want to update the committee on the cash collections. We saw the blank number was 22.7 million in the month of June, so that's the highest in this fiscal year, and last highest was October 24, so that seems to be promise pay and the efforts, you know, all the efforts we're doing on collections and better data with smart metering. So hoping that continues. Related to HDI, we did a quarterly meeting earlier this week with HDI. Their activities continued to trend downward in terms of number, volume of credits and the dollar amounts. It was about a million as well for the month of June. May was about 1,076,000. It's at the bottom left-hand corner. So Susanna's team's continuing to work daily with the HDI personnel that are taking the customers' high bill calls and work on the process there for all smart metering. If it's not something that's immediately resolved, then it results in a investigation at the on-site. So we get that information, turn it back to HDI and address the customer's concern or ask them to do a repair, take some action to reduce the consumption.
A greater percentage of those are residential or commercial?
Mostly residential because of, you know, the balance is roughly over 80% of the meters are residential. So just because of that volume of residential, I'd say mostly residential, but there are going to be some commercial too. So process-wise, I think we will continue to meet with HDI a quarterly basis, work with their team. Susanna's team, again, has spent a lot of time to kind of retrain and have the appropriate responses for customers, and then try and get the issue addressed as soon as possible. On receivables, at the end of May, we're at 114.5 million. The past due category is actually down about 4% overall, so that was a reduction of almost 2.4 million to 63.5 million. And this group of roughly 25,000 customers, 14,888 are on a payment plan. So that's, you know, what we're asking customers to do to avoid a service disconnection, an interest-free payment plan. We mentioned last month the program for the month of the summer months is if you install a new payment plan, you're able to sign up and get penalties waived. We've had some good participation in that in the first about, I guess, 4 to 5 weeks on that. So new plans since June 1, there's been 2,497 new plans, and then of those, 348 paid their entire balance in full. And then the waived penalties were about 265,000 that we put on the account. So talking to Promise Pay, they've said that that's some of the best response rate, and the retention on the payment plans themselves is still about 88% of people are staying within their payment plan. So that's
so great. The total amount of delinquent accounts is 63 million.
right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. This slide is where we break it out by the different sizes. So kind of focusing on the less than 500, that first box. So the customer was less than 500. That's 9,172 meters. Of those, only 3,422 had signed up for a payment plan. And that number last month was 3,370. So that's a favorable increase of about 52 people signed up in that category. So that's positive direction. So we just want to get people to sign up for the interest-free payment plan, avoid the service disconnection possibility, and get caught back up.
Quick comment, just what Gray was saying, and kudos to his shop, the financial budget, as well as customer service and communications, because what we are focused on the last couple of weeks is to encourage more people to get on Promise Pay. As you can see, Gray indicated, 60%, and that's for the outstanding bills greater than 60 days. So, and from what I understand, that max period, is up to 3 years. So right now, if everyone stays on that Promise Pay, that's 60% of $63.5 million, right at $38 million that we collect over the next 3 years. And, as indicated a couple of minutes ago, is encouraging more people to get on Promise Pay. The last thing we want to do is go to collection, shut your water off. So again, we're increasing our campaign in our bills, reaching out to our customers. If you're in arrears, make an effort, come talk to us to get on Promise Pay so we can get you back caught up.
Okay.
And that's, installment length is kind of graded based on the size of the past due. So, and only the most extreme amount is at the full 36 months. So just to share that. But next on the dashboard, I want to highlight for the committee, days cash on hand, 158 for water, a little lower on sewer than it had been running, 130 days cash on hand. That's driven based on some of our capital contracts where we draw the money off the loan, but we've paid the contractors ahead of the loan. So the loan draw is coming from the lender, just a timing issue, particularly the WIFIA loan, but no concerns. We've put in the final debt service coverage from the last audit that we just completed, so it's well in excess of our requirements.
What's the requirement again, Gray?
1.25 for budgeted.
What is that one in the middle? Is it 130?
The 90 days is the cash on hand, so 90. So we're still above 90, which is line 9. And next slide, I want to just highlight again on the WIFIA program. That's shown here at the third line down. The sewer, we've drawn 129 million, so that's up to draw number 17, which is these are large sewer contracts to complete the consent decree works. So we have a $21.8 million loan draw, coming to us to replenish the sewer fund. So we still, and then the chart below is showing the available bond proceeds, but all those amounts are committed to the contracts to complete consent decree, and the other loans we continue to work with and have available for power complex, smart metering, lead service line, as you know. So some similar activity to what we see each month. Then on next slide is my page is messed up here. Our capital improvement plan actually had to fix a formula there. The monthly disbursements were $27.8 million for capital expenditures. Year to date, it's like $127 million rather than that figure. And then we appropriated additional $19.3 million in the month of May. So we're continuing on with all of our capital plans. The grant funding was $2.1 million for the month of May for JIRR. And then next slide is our customer service slide. We had some lower call volumes for the month of May, really across the board on calls, and then lobby activity, but an increase in the emails received. So that's probably a little bit more preferred in terms of, the track, the customer request. The average call wait time was down for the month of May to 420. This is just a charting of this wait time. And then On the bills collections, again, with smart meter, we're seeing the benefits as you would expect. So the month of May, we had 96% bills issued were all actual reads. So we've already looked at June as well, seeing similar numbers. So just they trying to take advantage of having the better data and getting the consistency. So as we look, now we're, I guess, into Q3, trying to just continue with the same processes and get more consistency amongst all the customer classes. This slide is on payment arrangement service disconnects. May was actually a little bit of a net loss in payment plans. That's the blue. June will pick up with the big numbers that I mentioned earlier. Over 2,400 were added in the month of June. Service disconnects is the gray bar. That's again a focus area, as Ron mentioned, as we're Susanna's team's worked with like a strike team to work with service disconnects, and again going through the process to ensure we follow all the communication protocols. We have all solid data. Customer has all the right information, so this is only used as a last resort situation. But for the month of May, it was a little over 750 service disconnects. So we'll continue to keep that as a focus area and work with our customers to only have that as a last resort situation. Collection ratio is, as a percentage basis, improving because of the lower revenue, and monthly collections have been up the last few months, couple months, as I mentioned. And after that, it's just a financial. So happy to take any other questions committee may have.
Thank you, Greg. Oh, okay.
Director, want to know for the record, Director Kennedy is in attendance.
All right, so Chris Bergeron. Chief.
Morning, Directors. Chris Bergeron, Chief of Engineering. I was asked to come to the board to kind of talk about just change order process, amendments. I know there were some questions in, I think, in the May cycle. So just when we're talking about change orders themselves, I will continue to refer to this graphic for the rest of my career because it's one of my favorite ones, because this is when we built the Panola Water Tower. That is the circle on the right side. All the red lines are all the underground power lines and feeders that we have on our Carrollton plant, and all the blue lines were the existing water lines and other obstacles, and then black was what we were trying to build at the time in the dark lines. So especially when we talk about our Carrollton treatment plant, how challenging it is to build new infrastructure on existing areas. So several of these red lines were not where we said or we thought they were, and moving any of them after the fact or designing something around an existing line or power feeder and it not being where we intended it to be can certainly be one of our biggest challenges with unforeseen site conditions. Other changes, like I'll have listed here, sometimes we do have requests at the, as we move through a contract and say, look, this would have been a better idea now that we're seeing it as it's being built. Errors and omissions are a reality when it comes to design as well. And then, of course, extensions, and then just other items that may pop up. But when you talk about the types of changes, you know, you kind of, I'm not going to say this is a end-all, be-all, but for the most part, they all fall into these three buckets. For public works, if there's a change, it generally works out to be a public, a change order. Professional services are amendments. You know, sometimes goods and materials have amendments as well, so that's what I'm saying. These aren't one-to-one for everything, and the contract renewals are usually through goods, materials, or our maintenance, our contracts, especially on the network side, where we give a scope of work and then we renew it for a following year. The life cycle of a change order is, we've kind of established it pretty well at this point, where we usually rely on the vendor or the contractor to point out a changed condition. They would go one of two directions from there. Either the project manager or engineer would decide that it needs to progress before being approved, just to prevent a delay on the contract. That is a very common condition for us. As you all know, that the ratification of change orders is pretty common for us, usually because the contractor will take weeks to a month to come up with their proposal to present to us. So if you're talking weeks on a project, that if it were to go to a standstill, it's just not really sustainable. So once that request is submitted to us, we would evaluate it. Oftentimes that results in a negotiation back and forth. The first proposal is very rarely approved. We present it to our internal committee just to make sure that we're doing things correctly. It's our CMRC. It's collaboration of a bunch of different departments, the legal team, budgets available, PDU, finance and procurement. Once that is, those are parallel path as we usually bring it to this committee. Again, there's some thresholds here. I'll go to the next slide. Once the GSO approves it, we come to this committee. Once this committee makes a recommendation, it goes to the board of directors. And then if it is an amendment, then it needs to go to our legal team to draft and execute that amendment for professional services and goods for those types of things. And then once all of that is done, then we have the authorization to pay the vendor. So that's what makes things a little lengthy on that process for us. I brought this back as well as a slide I brought back a couple years ago. It's just the highlights of how that authorization is right now. So everything under $1 million, both the actual contract itself and when the change order or amendment does not exceed the total contract threshold amount of $1 million, the executive director has the authority to approve that. So those are usually just brought as an informational item to the board. Once the contract threshold goes over $1 million and stays under $5 million, the executive director has a little bit of threshold of basically $250,000 worth of change order authority. Yes, ma'am.
Is the change amount cumulative or per?
Aggregate. So
It's aggregate.
once we breach that $250,000 threshold,
Okay.
a $5 change order technically has to come to this board for approval.
And what happens if the board disapproves something that's already happened?
That question has been brought up, I think, every time I've
We couldn't process the payment without the
Yeah.
board authorization.
You're kind of over the barrel, aren't you?
Yes, we are. And I've been in that position quite a few times. And as Chris indicated with the ratification, I mean, sometimes to keep from having the delays, and the delays will actually cost you more than the change order itself if you know,
If it gets litigated.
if it gets litigated, and if it gets drawn out. So, you know, as Chris indicated, you know, the engineer, the project engineer, they make very good decision determination to keep the project moving and minimize delay costs.
And then once it goes over $5 million, the next threshold is $500,000. So there's no, I know we have the 500,000 or 10%. It's fundamentally $500,000 because it could be a $20 million project. That threshold is still only $500,000 because it's whichever is lesser. So one of the questions I know that brought up was amendments, that we often have amendments that come for, especially for design contracts, that on paper, when you look at it, they're hundreds and maybe thousands of % of the original contract. So this is an example of one. The bulk chemical feed and storage facility is a long-desired project at our Carrollton Water Plant to consolidate all of our chemicals and put them in one facility so we don't have totes throughout the plant trying to feed into the treatment process. And I think this is a good example of how those percentages can be misleading. We had an original scoping contract on this one, $60,000, where we pulled in a consultant, a design consultant, and asked them to basically do a feasibility for us. We want to do this. We know what we want to do. Help us find the right spot and help us make sure that it's feasible to do in that right spot. So on that original contract, it was only $60,000. They gave us a couple of options for layouts and said, would you pick one of these? And then we will then build our proposal based on that alternative and come back with another proposal for you as an amendment. All this was built out in the original contract with the intent to award those additional phases to this consultant. But when we present it to the board as a percentage of the original contract, you can see when you go to the final design of $600,000, it's 1,000% of the original contract. And then we move on and we change some designs as you get into it before, the 30 and 60% design submittals. The intent was to add the construction services as well, which we did in that Amendment 3. And then we had to put this project on hold because we didn't have funding, and we had to make some changes as with the delays because we adapted at our plant, and that's where Amendment 5 comes in, where we had to change some construction scope. The hope was to get this, in this specific one, the hope was to have construction overlap with other existing projects with this consultant. But because we didn't have the funding to do the construction, it ended up not working out in our favor. Again, we still haven't moved forward with this project as construction. We're still working on it.
When we're talking about construction services, are these related to the design in some way, or is this actual construction?
It's
Is
the
this oversight or?
oversight of the construction.
Okay.
So there are two different responsibilities we often have where you have your construction manager and your inspectors who are on site looking at it, making sure the contractor is doing what they're supposed to be building. And then there are the design services during construction that are responsible for reviewing submittals, making sure that the products that they are delivering are correct, and then RFIs, questions contractors may have during construction to clarify the specs and drawings.
So one of the things I don't understand when we're doing this is, you started out, okay, I don't know how much pricing fed into the decision to go with this.
None.
No,
So
pricing is not an issue. So the fact that we've added on and added on and added on isn't a problem.
So
But I mean, I don't understand the professional services contracting element at this point.
I understand. I'm hoping this visualizes it a little better. So on paper, this is what it looks like. The 3% is the original contract, and the rest of that chart is all of our change orders. And that's how it looks, and it doesn't look good. That's a bad look of visualization, which is why I prefer it to look like this, where you have a pre-designed scope. This is just, hey, let's come out here, we'll put a couple engineers, we'll come out, we'll take a look, we'll, again, like I said, feasibility.
The evaluation of whoever the competitors are based on the scope, the 3% scope, or the whole thing?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
But what I'm
So
trying to
selecting the vendor itself,
To do all of this?
do all of it. So for this specific contract, the original contract was to select the vendor with the intent of awarding the future phases of
Okay.
both design and construction with an out. So we had an off-ramp to not award the construction services if we didn't feel that they were doing the appropriate work to earn that, essentially.
Okay.
So while the dollar amounts themselves aren't specifically written out in the contract, the intent is there because they couldn't tell us how much those services were before designing it. And this is
Then how do you know you've got your best value at the design phase?
so that's where there's two directions that that you can go with design fees. One is a level of effort which is what we did here, which is come scope this out and then give us a level of effort with a dollar amount for design. That was at $640,000. The other way is there are curves. There's FP and C curves, or if FEMA has a curve, basically you as the designer will get paid a % of the final construction. So you would sign the contract. The contract actually wouldn't have a dollar amount. We'd have essentially a dummy amount written in there because we expect it to be $10 million. The curve says that's about 8%. So the contract is for $800,000. And then we adjust that as we go. We refine our construction estimate and say, okay, maybe it's not 10 million, maybe it's 12 million, so our contract needs to be amended to reflect that for the design. There are pros and cons to both ways, right?
Yeah, and I would say, Chris, I know when I started the board, the second methodology indicated with percentage of construction was common. But right now, most of our contracts we're doing now in professional services is a level of effort.
They are. That's
So,
What?
level of effort.
where they give us
Yes, that's correct.
we're going to do this scope of work, and here's how many man-hours we expect it to take, broken down by,
And that's our common practice now.
So two key points. The first, professional services by federal and state law cannot include price in the selection criteria. It's got to be qualification-based. So that's where it starts. However, the question is, how do we know that we're getting value, that we're not being abused? And even though we may not base the fee on construction fee curves, that's a good check. So if we get a level of effort proposal and it shows 50% of construction cost in design and construction services, we have to ask some pointed questions. Typically, construction services, and those are basic services, doesn't include testing, surveying, et cetera, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the construction amount. We can also use things like the number of sheets in their drawing set. A sheet's $5,000 to $6,000 per sheet. As a consultant, that's how we would just rough order of magnitude. Also, unlike with contractors, we do have the ability to ask for audited overhead rates. So we can essentially have a look into the underwear drawer if we need to for overhead rates. If someone's trying to charge us $1,000 an hour, we have the ability to push back. Whereas with a contractor, it's low bid, and then you have to negotiate those things. So those are some.
And I think it was 2020 or 2019 when the board went from doing a percentage of the construction to level of effort, because there was a reduction.
wholesale.
Wholesale,
We
right.
started doing that a little bit prior to that. For example, the Waterhammer program, all of that design was level of effort. That started in 2011.
Okay?
And as a consultant, I hated having that because it's a cap. They're not guaranteed that amount of money. You have to submit an invoice that says these people worked on this for this number of hours. So that's the best benefit for us.
That's pretty.
So this is a quick, one of our change orders we did on the power complex projects, just as a visual of what we did, why it takes so long, and what happens between when we see it and it comes to this board. So this was pretty simple in theory. This is a drainage pipe we needed to install from the bottom left of the screen to the top right. That's the light blue. You can already see there's a wall in the way. That wall was not supposed to be there. So that was not in our drawings, all of that laid out. And it wasn't as simple as this. The bigger problem was that triangular wing wall. That wing wall kind of jutted out as the pipe went back towards us on the screen. So there was a couple of these, and we asked the contractor, because they basically said, we can't move forward unless we demo the wall. Can we demo the wall? The answer, of course, is yes. Yes, please demo the wall. We will work out the negotiation as we move on, because that whole part of the project would come to a complete stop otherwise. So this is the timeline of how long it takes, or at least in this specific case. In May, we identified it. Within a week or two, we told them just, yes, please move forward. Work on T&M. T&M basis means you do the work, you collect your timesheets, you submit them to us and say, here's the number of hours we worked for this specific task, and here's the materials we used to do it. So it is a very simple quantitative analysis of saying, you said this was 30 hours of man hours. We disagree. We don't think you worked. Some of these guys were maybe duplicating effort, or it should have been part of the original scope. So there is a little bit of negotiation there, but it's really just simple checks based on who the construction inspection. So between that May, it really was only, I think, 2 weeks of work for this one, but we didn't get the proposal until July. We reviewed it, asked them to revise it based on exactly what I said, and we didn't get a revised proposal until October. And then it was presented to this board in November as a ratification. So yes, it did take over 5 months for us to get this relatively simple change order approved, but there's a lot that goes on between there that we are working diligently on our side to make sure that we're not just rubber stamping things.
And also, there are reimbursement requirements that.
Of course, yes, depending on the different agencies we're working with. And I apologize, there's a a bunch of redundant slides on the packet that, from my last presentation that were printed out. But that's the end of my presentation. If you have other questions.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for the report. We've been asking for that. But as a community advocate, the questions I get are more basic. In the initial proposal, there's a layout of what the costs are going to be. The concern for constituents is, why does that amount change so significantly? And why was that not a part of the initial review and evaluation to make that cost more minimal instead of more excessive? Does that make sense?
Are we talking about construction?
Yeah, yeah.
So the general industry standard for change orders is going to be in the 5 to 10% range. You start exceeding 10%, questions can be asked.
Because we get more than 10% though.
Sometimes we do, you're
Yeah,
right.
we get
And
higher
that's why
percentages,
that's
40,
why I will
50%.
continue to show that first slide with the picture of the Panola Water Tower, of some of the difficulties of those types of projects that may cause those to exceed 10%. I know that our power complex projects have actually been far under 10%, despite the complexity of those.
Yeah, and I think some of the ones you're speaking on, many of our consent decree SERP projects,
Yes.
we've done with DPW, some of those probably, those did go over 10%. And those were based on circumstances in the field, change orders, and certain timeline relative to the consent decree of meeting that timeline which we have to meet. So you're exactly correct.
Some of those projects, a lot of times we are at the mercy of DPW. If they want to make a change, we may have to pivot ourselves and make some changes. So there are outside forces that sometimes cause us.
So in the JIRR,
So basically, when the initial proposal is submitted, there is no way to determine some of the things that may occur that require a change order, because the perception by constituents is very much different in terms of why so many change orders and why the amounts are so extravagant. And I don't necessarily know how to respond to that, technically, professionally, or otherwise. Is there a common response that makes sense? Because people are thinking this is just a way to add additional cost to the project, period.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
My understanding, that was great presentation. So in these scenarios, we're saying that this specific case, there's design work.
Yes.
You don't know the construction at all until the assessment is done, right?
So trying to think of the right way to answer this. So if I'm saying, and quite a few of our change orders are from underground unknown conditions, right? You talk about the
But
streets.
some are not.
Some are not. I'm not gonna say
Some
they
are
all
not.
are.
Right.
But especially when we talk about projects in the streets where there's conflicts, right? A sewer line is not where it said it's supposed to be. A water line crosses this. There's a water leak, right? That's a lot of our street projects where, especially on the SERP side, SERP gets out there to start doing some sewer work. There's a water line that's broken that we didn't necessarily know it was specifically there, but it stops progress for the sewer replacement.
I think those are easy to explain.
They are, and
right?
they do add up, is what I'm saying is, and for things where the unforeseen conditions part of it, there is the ability to do some underground exploration ahead of time.
But I think we can track that pretty well. I think and tell me if I'm wrong, some more clarity around the 3%. I love that second graph that you put up, the second pie chart, right? 3% of the assessment for that project. And we're saying that when that evaluation goes out, we don't know what the other costs are gonna be until the assessment is done. That's how we end up with 4-figure
Right,
That's where we kind of get pinched. And so I can say, we can drill down and say, there was a wall in the way. Like, I can do that all day.
well, the 3% is for, that, those types of contracts are almost exclusively going to be design contracts. where
that's-
we
and that's
start
what
with
I'm
a small
getting at.
scope,
Yeah.
and we know it's going to expand, but without really, if I had asked that, specifically that one, to say, hey, give me a final design price on this contract, without you even looking at a
Right.
single drawing, they're gonna be looking at Google Earth and saying, all right, we think we might be able to do this, and we're gonna throw $500,000 at it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll overshoot it and say, it'll be $1 million if you don't want me to do much research into
I
it.
think the answer is that those, when we're dealing with those contracts, they're not being awarded on a price basis.
That's what I'm getting at.
They're not allowed to.
And they can't.
Can't, and they're being awarded on a quality of work, an assessment of the person's ability to do the work, I mean, the firm's ability. And so it's being done in phases. If you do they do the first phase, if you're happy with that, you go on to the second phase. And so I think that's the explanation of that. The others, I think we should be keeping track of whether something's because of unexpected conditions in the field, or if they're an error. And so we can deal with, you know, the metrics on that and see how we're doing.
And we do track those measures.
But I don't think it comes to us,
No.
and I think it should.
Okay, and we can
There's some kind of summary.
we can definitely look at that, because we do have that data.
Does that help you at all, Joe?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but I think that was tremendously helpful for me
Yeah.
as a board member to understand, because I was very confused.
I understand. It's a lot of work we do on the back end before it comes to this group.
Joe, anything else?
Oh, good.
Maurice, you want to add?
Oh,
Okay,
And we
thank
have
you
Dir-
very much.
We have Director Scholas in attendance as well.
Okay. So we'll now go on to our action item individually, followed by 10 general superintendent's recommendations. First is Resolution R-117-2025, authorization for amendment number 6, the maintenance and support agreement between Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans and Cogsdale Corporation. Kathy Smith, our IT director, will present, no, wait a minute. Yes.
Yes.
Regarding, we'll present on that.
Good morning. I am presenting an authorization for amendment number 6 to our Cogsdale, what we call our bucket of hours. So each year, we usually renew our bucket of hours for support with Cogsdale. This is for the first of 2 possible renewals for an amount of not to exceed $562,500, which is 2,500 hours of support. Keep in mind, we only pay for the hours that we use. Last year, we were probably about 2/3 of that number because of the financial system implementation, which, you know, kind of was a little higher. So we're asking for the renewal for amendment number 6.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve Resolution R-117-2025?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Public comment?
No public comment, Chair.
All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Okay, and now Steve Nelson will give the general superintendent's recommendations. Steve?
wonderful. Thank you very much. We have 8 change orders by ratification, 1 miscellaneous item, and 1 final acceptance item. And as we have just had a presentation on change orders, please feel free to stop me at any time, and I will try to go into a little more detail in order to explain with the backdrop of Chris's excellent presentation. The first is ratification of change order number 2 under Resolution R-093-2025. This is for contract 30229, and the vast majority of these change orders are related to the SERP work, which we are on track to have the subsurface work completed by October, and then the surface restorations done Q1 of next year. So I would expect September, October, November, December's board meetings will have a lot of these change orders, but then that should tail off there in Q1 of next year. This change order is in the amount of $88,501 and represents just under 1% of the total contract value, initially at $9.95 million. The scope is to add 113 days to the contract, and part of that was related to identification of water leaks that had to be fixed. So part of the challenge as you open up streets related to sewer work, you find that you have a water leak that could be adding what we call surcharge, additional flow to the system. We don't want to cover up a water leak if we discover it. That's an unforeseen circumstance, needs to be addressed. The next is Resolution R101-2025. This is ratification of change order number 2 for contract 30230 for the Carrollton Basin number 2. Again, SERP work between BLD Services LLC and the Sewerage and Water Board. This change order is in the amount of $116,433.97. This represents just under 1.4% of the original contract value. And the scope of this work is to add manholes and also additional pipe bursting on this contract. And again, this is due to unforeseen conditions during the course of construction. The next is Resolution R102-2025. This is a ratification of change order number 2 for contract 30232, Carrollton Basin number 3 for the sewer rehabilitation program between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and BLD Services LLC. This is a change order in the amount of $50,242.08. This, coupled with a previous change order of $108,500, brings the total change order amount to just under 2% of the total contract value. And this adds 147 days due to other contractors working in the area. We do have multiple contractors working in the Carrollton Basin. This is the bulk of that $250 million that Gray talked about is being spent in the Carrollton Basin. The next is ratification under Resolution R103-2025. This is change order number 2 for contract 30235, Carrollton Basin number 5 for sewer rehabilitation between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and BLD Services LLC. This change order will add $776,351 and brings the total change order value to just under 9%. This is in part due to elevated river levels. So if the contractor has to stop work, go off, it delays the project. We have, again, existing water leaks. And then this is another item where with the DWSRF monies, we have asked contractors to help us identify lead service lines. So this is something that was added to the contract so that we can provide a better end product. The next is Resolution R104-2025. This is a ratification of change order number 3 for contract 30255 in the Carrollton Basin number 14 for the sewer rehabilitation program between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and Fleming Construction Company, LLC. This is a change order in the amount of $1.4 million. And this is in addition to previous change orders in the amount of $1.8 million. This brings the total change value to 31% total. So this is one of our higher change order percentages, and this is for additional, this represents an adjustment of quantity of multiple bid items related to restoration scope changes, full line replacement rather than point repairs and lining, and associated sewer work and water line repairs. Again, as they dig up the trench and they find that the sewer main cannot be lined and they have to replace it, that's additional scope that they would not have known about at the time of bidding.
And just a question.
Yes, sir.
That's something that cannot be determined until the work is actually begun?
That is correct. So once they dig up the pipe or get into it again and review it, because the CCTV that we have is multiple years old. So this is something they would not know about at the time of bidding. And we could, in the instance where you have, say, a dip in the pipe, you might even be able to run a liner through it, but then you're going to be holding water in the pipe. If you have a crushed pipe, that's something you can't put a liner through. You have to remove it and replace it, and that's more expensive than putting a liner through. Does that answer your question? Very well.
Yeah, it answers the question.
Very well. The next is Resolution R10105-2025. This is a ratification of change order number 3 for contract 30256 in the Carrollton Basin number 15. Sewer rehabilitation work between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and Hard Rock Construction, LLC. This change order is in the amount of $296,431. This is in addition to previous change orders in the amount of $1.6 million, which again, this is one of our higher total percentages. This brings us to just under 31% of the original total contract change. And then this is again, additional sewer point repairs, additional replacement, and then lateral work. and also those lead service lines that I alluded to before. And again, these are things that you wouldn't know at the time of bidding. Once they open up the ground and they see what's there, that is what we would consider an unforeseen condition. The next is Resolution R106, 2025. This is a ratification of change order number 4 for contract 30260, Carrollton Basin number 19, sewer rehabilitation work between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and Hard Rock Construction LLC. This change order is in the amount of $463,490. That is 6.8% of the total contract. Previous change order amounts were $1.8 million at 35%. So that brings this is the highest, I believe, on this agenda at 45% of the total contract value. And the change is to adjust quantities of existing bid items to complete the scope of work, additional sewer point repairs, manhole frames and covers, point repairs to drainage to alleviate conflicts with the sanitary sewer, and additional linear feet of jacking and boring across a railroad track line. So the condition of the pipe underneath the rail, they were not able to line it, they had to jack and bore. So these are conditions that you wouldn't know at the time of bid. It was discovered during construction. The final is not related to the SERP program. This is the only change order not related to SERP. This is change order number 9 for contract 1376. This is the water hazard mitigation program. These are repairs to our high lift pump station. This is resolution R107, 2025. And this is between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and M.R. Pittman Group, LLC. This is an additional cost of $225,000. Previous change orders in the amount of $2.7 million increased the total contract 13%, so we're at just shy of 15% total. This is related to delays where the contractor, we had a failure of a UPS, this is a backup battery system at our Carrollton plant. And so the contractor had to wait until that was fixed to finish this off, because if we had had a failure at Carrollton, or Claiborne, excuse me, a failure at Claiborne, we would have lost the ability to pump water, or at least adequately pump it into the city. So we had to ask them to demobilize, wait, and then return once that UPS was complete. So this is in the interest of safety and providing potable water to the city. Are there any other questions or any questions on those change orders?
Okay, may I have a motion to approve contract change order by ratification resolutions R-093, 2025, R-101, 101-2025, R-102-2025, R-103, 2025, R-104, 25, R-105, 2025, R-106, 2025, and R-107, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? None. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right.
We have one miscellaneous item. This is the authorization for a cooperative endeavor agreement between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and Plaquemines Parish for mutual emergency assistance for potable water supply. This is under Resolution R108, 2025. We have an intertie on the lower coast of Algiers that we've been able to supply Plaquemines with water during the freeze this last year, and we've also had at least 2 other requests where they've had water main work in the area and have had to drop the pressure from their system, so we're able to help our neighbors to the south by providing water. There are meters on this, so we'll be able to charge them our commercial rate, and it would also work the other way as well. If we had an issue on the lower coast, we have the ability for them to supply us water as needed. So this is, I think, a very good agreement for us to enter into, and it's something where we'll be able to help our neighbors.
And so their capability is just a redundancy for lower coast if it was our way?
Typically, lower coast, you might be able to supply it to some of the upper coast, but I don't think they have quite enough to supply all of the West Bank. It's an 8-inch intertie, so it would certainly supply the lower coast, but probably not a whole lot of the entire West Bank.
And I would say several years ago, they did supply, Plaquemines did supply Sewerage and Water Board in the lower coast area with water, based on issues we had.
Just curiosity, staying on West Bank, do we have anything with Jefferson Parish on the West Bank similarly?
We have a tie that's closed via valve between Algiers and Gretna.
Okay,
but it's not active.
all right, thanks.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve miscellaneous resolution R-108, 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment?
None.
All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Final acceptance?
Very good. We have one final acceptance, and we'll be seeing more of these as we move through the CERT program. This is Resolution R-109, 2025. This is the authorization of the final acceptance of Contract 30238. This is for the restoration of existing gravity flow sewers by excavation and replacement from manhole to manhole, CIPP to lining from manhole to manhole, lining of service laterals, point repairs between the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans and Wallace C. Drennan.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve final acceptance resolution R-109, 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment?
None, Chair.
All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. So we have 3 information items for committee members to review at their convenience. Are there any public comments, council?
No.
Okay. If there are no other matters, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're now adjourned.
I have to tap it?
That was a very tentative tap, King.
Good stuff.
Oh, really? We used to have it and they don't bring it out anymore. So I saw it. I was like, we gotta bring that back up.
Okay. I feel like, boing, boing.